Yo.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to Certified Life Coach Institute, CLCI Live.
All right, we are live. And we're talking about stuff today. Important stuff.
Yes.
But before we get started with this stuff, and to all our future students, hello, it's nice to see you. This video will be used in our curriculum. So, before we begin, please comment. And for those who are watching this live, or those who are watching it on YouTube, either way, or on Facebook later, we want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. We will do our best to answer them live or afterwards. And also make sure you smash that subscribe button, that like, that follow. Do it. It's the only way we know you enjoy what we are doing and that this content that we are putting out is meaningful for you. And after that, I'm going to hand it over to some other folks so that they are able to talk about what we are talking about today. And if I take a bite of coleslaw, I'm sorry.
So this is CLCI Live. Some of you might be watching this for the first time because of your 102 class. Part of the curriculum requires that you watch videos on the core competencies, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The ICF has updated their core competencies as of, I believe it was last year. I believe so. They've updated them, and we're going to be covering the foundation, and number 1, demonstrate ethical practice, and number 2, embodying a coaching mindset. So
Beautiful.
Lot to talk about here.
A whole lot.
Let's get started.
And that's what we'll be. We're going to try our best to be mindful of time. I just sort of want to outline a structure for how we are going to discuss each of these core competencies. Each core competency is nestled under an overarching, I guess, theme is what you would call it. And so these, as Anthony mentioned, would be foundation. And within that, we talk about our primary core competency, and underneath each core competency, there are several sub competencies. So we're going to go through those sub competencies, and I would like for us to keep in mind as we do this, what does this look like in your practice, and what might it also look like when it is not in your practice, when it's lacking in your practice? So these are the questions I really want us to answer. And then at the end, I want us to briefly discuss if these core competencies change as we move from ACC, PCC, or MCC. And what I mean by that is if they change in the way they show up in your practice. I will say that today's core competencies, don't think they have any variation from ACC to PCC to MCC. So that'll be something we get into more when we get into your core competencies. So Anthony, you briefly mentioned it, demonstrates an ethical practice. I think we have a fantastic caption for that here with a definition underneath: understands and consistently applies coaching ethics and standards of coaching. So just off the right now, before we move on to those bullet points that it comes with, what does that mean to you guys, you all?
I think just oh, go ahead.
I was about to say, it means that there is a actual guideline of coaching that you need to follow as an ICF professional. It's not the Wild West of coaching. There are rules and standards that you have to follow and keep following consistently throughout your whole coaching career. That's the general basis. We'll get into what those standards are in a little bit, but that's what I get from it.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, to that point, I've always said in classes, there's a difference between a coaching conversation that you have as an ICF professional, an arbitrary conversation you have with a friend, and a coaching session where otherwise your only concern is, am I helping my client or am I helping my customer? This gives you a guideline that keeps you in line with what the ICF calls coaching. That way, if for whatever reason the conversation goes left, right, or whatever direction, you have something to fall back on and the coaching session doesn't descend into chaos, if you will.
And this ethical practice is going to be defined in what breakdown is going to be. The idea of maintaining that standard throughout every coaching experience you have is going to be a really utmost important part of this, especially as we're going through 1 and 2, the foundation discussion today. Take note, think about applying these skills. How would you apply these skills? And even consider where you've made the mistake and how you can adjust that mistake to meet these standards.
So I think from that, again, we mentioned that there is an actual code of ethics. Big note on that. We have a video we did earlier this year about the ICF code of ethics, where we did a very deep dive into that code of ethics. So after you are done watching this video, if you want to familiarize yourself with the code of ethics, you can not only go to CLCI's or find that video on our live, you can also go to ICF's website and access that code of ethics. They have them available to you anywhere and anytime. I'm also dropping the website for the core competencies into our chat right now. So if anybody wants to follow along, you are 100% welcome to do so. So let's move on to that first bullet point, shall we? Our first bullet point underneath this is as follows. Demonstrates personal integrity and honesty in interactions with clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders.
Seems pretty self-explanatory. Don't lie to people. Don't do like a bait and switch. Don't break your contracts with people.
Don't embellish things
Don't
that are
embellish.
not. Yeah.
Don't overpromise results.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
And just to put a little definition on, we kind of know what clients and relevant stakeholders are. I guess relevant stakeholders would be anybody who's involved in the coaching session, but sponsors, those are the people who pay for the coaching session. So your sponsor might be the client, in which case there's not really a sponsor role. Other times you have an organization who is paying for coaching to be done, and you are doing business directly with the sponsor, and then you'll be coaching their clients. So.
And it definitely gets a little confusing in those spaces, and I think it's something we'll probably dive a little deeper into with regard to who am I responsible for, what am I, or who am I speaking to? Who am I responsible to, I guess, maintaining that agreement with? And when you have a sponsor, you're going to have a contract that details out all of those things with the sponsor, and in addition with the client as well. So there's going to be more than one contract, and all of those details should be ironed out within that contract so that there aren't these big questions once the coaching begins, that it's all sort of explained prior to. The other piece I wanted to quickly tap into that you mentioned, Anthony, and this was one of the examples given in the ICF videos. They have a short 10-minute video on this. And that is that maintaining contracts is part of this integrity and acting with integrity. So if you're somebody that sets an appointment with your client for 1 p.m. and you are showing up at 1:10 p.m. as the coach each time, I would say that there is a lack of integrity happening in there and a lack of honesty happening there. And it's also it also is not respecting your client's time and what you agreed to within the contract. So it can get down to as little details as that when we are talking about this concept of integrity and honesty.
When we're looking at even coaching evaluations of a coaching session, if you don't demonstrate ethical practices, you will fail. Because it counts for every part of the competency. So you must follow these rules with high standards and meet your contracts. Yeah,
it also sets the tone for the entire coaching session and relationship. So if number one is not there, probably the rest of the core competencies are not going to be, apparent. Should we move on to number 2?
Let's do it. I will get it up in 1 second. You asked me at the worst time.
I have these locked and loaded. We got to get through them soon.
I've got it up.
I can
Thank
read
you.
So we've got is sensitive to client's identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs.
It's got to be client-centric. It's got to be about the client. It's got to be awareness of who they are, and your representation is centered around who they are.
I think this is one of the things that separates coaching from so many other conversations too, because think of conversations with other professionals, not to say that they're better or worse than coaching. That's a completely separate conversation to be had. But when someone comes in with a problem, what's the listener focused on? Solving the problem. Oh, you have this relationship issue, you have this career issue. Here, let me give you advice and send you about your way. But being sensitive to the client's identity makes you look at them beyond just the problem they're bringing to you. So if you can just, at the very least, don't let your client be personally identified with their problem, then you'll be much more sensitive to their identity, environment, experiences, and everything else that's exacerbating the goal or the problem.
So I had a question in this space, and it kind of came up in the second video that the ICF did on the next core competency, but they both overlap with one another, and this definitely overlaps with this. And it is sensitive to clients' identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs. I guess we're not diving as deep into culture, and so that's where the next one comes in. But this is kind of, it falls, I think, in that space. There was an example given of a Muslim client and the coach having her dog present in a one-on-one environment. And I was not aware that for Muslim dogs are, it's something that they don't necessarily want to be around. And I can't say every Muslim, but I'm sure is a group. And so it could be seen as very disrespectful to have your animal present, your dog present in that coaching situation. So my question is, how do I handle that as a coach? How much research am I bound to do? How do I research? What do I have to do?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, during consultations and however many initial conversations you have, even before they hire you, you're, yes, doing research on them. You're asking them questions. I find that one of the quickest ways to learn about my clients' preferences and pet peeves is to just ask, hey, is there anything I need to know about you? That way I show up correctly in the coaching sessions and I don't inadvertently offend you, cause you harm. Because even though the question itself might sound silly, like, why the heck wouldn't you ask that question? Imagine 3-4 sessions in, you haven't asked that question and you do something and nobody knew, and you didn't know that that was offensive to the client. Now there's a fracture of trust because you didn't do your due diligence in the beginning to ask, hey, what do I need to know about you? And it's okay if the client doesn't know in that moment, but if something does happen later on, just because you asked that question in the beginning, there's more grace to be extended there. So asking them up front.
I can certainly understand how that may or may not come up, what I practice privately. And the idea of this is I have to share what my format is. If I'm comfortable bringing my dog to work with me and we're doing it in person, I need to share that before they come in. Hey, this is what typically happens. I'm just checking in with you to make sure you're comfortable with that. And just share with them what your procedures are, who you are in that coaching session and what comes along with you in that session. A lot of us are now virtual. We have dogs barking in the background, right? Oh, I do. And I would probably start off a session with someone, I have dogs. I apologize. I'm going to mute myself. Should I hear them barking? But I'm still fully focused in on what you're saying. So setting those boundaries and expectations can go a long way.
I think a big piece of this too, though, is to talk to your client, like communicate the stuff, because what came forward for me is we can do all the research in the world, but we don't know how our client, they may label themselves as one thing or another, but we don't know what that means for our client and how that shows up for a client in their life and in their expectation. So having this open and honest discussion, and I think maintaining that level of openness and honesty throughout your coaching relationship is critical. So you can do all the research in the world, but I think the next best thing is to also speak to your client, if not like the best thing. So very, very critical. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? We feeling like we're comfortable with that? Any other questions here?
No.
I think kind of 3 goes into similar what we were speaking about.
So uses language appropriate and respectful to clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. I mean, a lot of us come from professional backgrounds. Some coaches, this might be your first professional job. It seems pretty self-explanatory to me, but don't curse in front of your clients. Understand that if you're an ICF professional, some of your sessions may be recorded for the mentor coach and for the ICF performance evaluation.
Mind you, though, I have seen coaches that their part of their marketing is that they curse. That's who they are. They're raw. They're off the cuff. They're, you know what I mean? But they're establishing that prior to the client getting there, right? So I think that while you're correct, Anthony, in probably most situations, what we want to the appropriate, respectful to client, sponsors, and relevant. Each one of those may be treated slightly different. That language might change, probably should change from clients to sponsors to relevant stakeholders.
The relevant stakeholders, though, as I was saying, could include people that are not in your current session but may listen to your recordings in the future, who also might be in charge of whether or not you get a passing evaluation or not. So not saying that, don't fully censor yourself, but keep in mind, you and your client might not be the only people who are listening and responding to your coaching session.
I think it's more if the client is using, when you're getting evaluated, the client uses those terms, swear words, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to evaluate that. But if you out of the blue just start cussing, that's not going to be looked at well, because are you really speaking the client's language, or are you speaking your language?
Mm-hmm. I like Sam's face. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's hop on to the next one, shall we? The next would be abides by ICF Code of Ethics and upholds core values. We have a video on that. You should go check it out.
Yeah. I think if we're looking at care, concern, centering around the client's beliefs and sensitivity, that empathy kind of speaks for itself in these ethics and core values of who they are.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things about the ICF Code of Ethics is if there are any questions coaches have on whether or not something's appropriate, the ICF Code of Ethics tends to answer a lot of that. For example, should I take on a partner as a client? Well, if you look at ICF Code of Ethics, I believe it's number 24, it's pretty explicit about making sure that you're mindful of the relationship you have with clients. And if you've got that pre-established romantic relationship with someone, does serving the interest of the client also serve the interest of the partner, or vice versa? It's just, take a look at the ethics, y'all. It's,
mind you, we might ninja coach our partners on occasion.
what you talking about?
And most of them get pretty smart about it, though, and go, don't do that to me.
Consider what we're coaching is the who in this space. We're coaching the who and who they are, what they represent, and those values that they're bringing to the table.
And then also ICF's general code of values. I think one of my favorite parts of their code of values is not that we aren't bound by do no harm or core values. We are actually required to do better to to create improvement, not just do no harm. It's a step above that, and it's one of my favorite things.
Just quickly to iterate, the core values are professionalism, collaboration, humanity, and equity. It's probably like a 4 or 5 page document that goes over the core values. You can search it, ICF core values, but those are the basics of it as well.
And let's move on to our next one. We have 3 more to cover before we move on to the next ethic, our next core competency. So 3 more sub-competencies here. So maintains confidentiality with client information per stakeholder agreements and pertinent laws. So really straightforward, but we get a lot of questions in this space. People want us to know how long, I mean, to the secondary part too. How long do I have to hold on to client information for? Am I bound by a 7-year rule or a 3-year rule or when it comes to laws? And we're not. We are not bound to having to hold on to anything for any amount of time. That is up to you. But that maintains confidentiality piece is important. And there are times that where it gets a little unclear. And we've definitely covered this a bit in that video with the ethics, where we start to talk about this piece when we're mentioning sponsors and stakeholders, and how do you maintain confidentiality with a sponsor when there's sponsors and stakeholders and other things like that involved. If you are coaching a child, somebody who is 16 maybe, and their parents have hired you to do so, do I have to maintain that 16-year-old's confidentiality if the parent is asking me questions?
You know what's a great answer to that? It's in your coaching agreement. Whatever it is agreed upon in the coaching agreement, that's what's confidential and that's what's not. So, for example, we have our own, when we do our staff student coaching, we lay out what is not considered confidential information. For example, you don't have to include it in yours, but it might be a good idea. Information that the coach had prior to coaching. That's one. Information that is generally known to the public or in the sponsor's industry. Information obtained by the coach from a third party, not the sponsor, without a breach of any obligation to the client. And we have more and more. Another one that's important. Information that involves illegal or criminal activity as defined by the law.
Yes.
That's not confidential. And we say that in our agreement that that's not confidential.
And hence the pertinent laws here as well.
So if you're coaching someone who's maybe a teenager, maybe they're an at-risk youth or something like that, maybe include something that you are not considering confidential information, things that are of imminent or likely risk or danger or harm to the client or others. That's not protected. That's not confidential. You will inform the parents or whoever if you feel like someone's going to be harmed. That wouldn't be considered confidential.
And we want to make sure that everybody knows that ahead of time. Another less controversial piece in this is that when we are coaching with our mentors, we have a clause within our contract that says we will be sharing these coaching sessions with our mentor coach and with ICF. So, and we also ask for our clients' consent on camera to do that as well, or on recording to do that as well. Typically only using their first name. So that is all communicated prior to, not only in the contract, but also there's a verbal confirmation in that recording in which when we are sharing that information. And that's just a very important thing to do, is to get that consent of sharing or sharing what is typically a confidential space. I have heard of coaches getting subpoenaed in various cases, whether they be divorce and things like that. And of course, always be honest. But you can also say, I need to maintain my client's confidentiality. So.
Realize as well, this is not a protected profession, which kind of leads into number 6, which is maintaining the distinctions between coaching, consulting, psychotherapy, and other supported professions. You do not have the same legal protections as a therapist does when it comes to confidential information. If a judge wants to know your notes or what was talked about in a coaching session, it's not legally protected. So just keep that in mind. But getting into what is the difference between coaching, consulting, psychotherapy, etc., make that known before you start coaching what coaching is, because a lot of potential clients aren't exactly as familiar as the coaches are with the differences.
Even
And
putting that so much into your contract so that they're clearly reading it as well as your discussion of it.
I know Sam goes into this heavily in when he teaches 101. Having that discussion with your client about what coaching is and what it is not is critical. And the more they understand that up front, the less hiccups along the way, ideally.
Yeah, it's service based, because just having that conversation stops the benign conversations like, wait, I thought I was coming to you for advice. And oh, I thought I was going to be talking about my childhood trauma from 20 years ago. Like, if you're upfront with that and your client isn't sure, but I want to talk about this, I want to go here, you're not obligated to take them on. I think all of this comes down to foundation, does it not? That's what we talk about. Yeah, that's what we talk about.
Foundation. And let's talk about our final one here. Refers clients to other support professionals as appropriate. Dovetailed beautifully into that.
So we cover this in Coaching 101, but it's also important. The ICF has a PDF. I can't remember exactly what it's called.
Referring a client, I believe, is, I'll pull it up and drop it into the.
But essentially, it's up to you as the coach to actually know the difference between consulting, psychotherapy, a therapist, or any other sort of mental health services. And if something that comes up that you're not comfortable with and you are clearly not, I guess, certified to give like therapeutic services, you have the resources to refer the person out to the services they need. And there are tactful ways to do it as well. You don't just say, I don't want to coach you. Here's a psychiatrist. Please talk to them. But having the resources is essential before you start going into coaching.
So before we move on to our next core competency, I just want to state that this core competency is sometimes a little hard for us, for a mentor coach to be listening for. It is and it isn't, right? It can show up in nuanced ways, but there's certain things like you're not going to be sharing, likely be sharing your contract with your mentor coach, your client coach contract, but that comes up in this. But this is so while you may not have to bring this to all of this, in thorough detail to your sessions when you are mentor coaching, it should just always be present in your practice. And so much so that they lay it out it's clearly for you and spell it out very clearly for you. And I don't think this changes from ACC to PCC to MCC. Is that correct? Okay, wonderful. Anything else you want to speak about in this space before we move forward to our next space, our second core competency?
It might have seemed that we kind of glanced over it pretty quickly. There is a lot more in depth when you consider the code of ethics, and then it will apply to your coach credentialing exam in the future. So please check out watch the video, check out the ICF code of ethics so you understand what it is to be ethical. The core competency just sort of bundles it up nicely.
And a quick term, this is what I wanted to do. I forgot for a second. A quick way of, it's beyond my scope of practice. Normalize the situation when you need to refer out to others besides yourself.
I have also dropped into our comments here the link to the YouTube with the Code of Ethics. And I will also drop in the link to the Code of Ethics on ICF's website as well. And then shall we move on to our next one?
Core
Yeah.
competency number 2.
Numero dos.
Those.
And that is as follows.
Embodies a coaching mindset. Definition: develops and maintains a mindset that is open, curious, flexible, and client-centered. That last one I probably think is the most important one. You see a lot of that in the questions that you'll get for the examination. So, shall we dive in, or do you guys want to talk about this definition a little more?
I think as we dive in, it will open up and we'll learn more.
Okay.
So let's just dive into the first one, shall we? Yeah. So numero 2.1, we'll say. Oh, sorry.
So 2.1 acknowledges that clients are responsible for their own choices.
Hey, everybody, did y'all notice that there's not a acknowledges that clients are responsible for their own choices, but I'm going to give them a little advice just in case they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. It's acknowledges that clients are responsible for their own choices. Be curious and open and flexible with them. Don't just be curious about how to solve their problem. This domain is going to feel so much easier to personify.
What do you do when you have an idea for the client?
When I have an idea for the client?
Yeah, that's like advice.
Yeah. So it really depends on a number of things. By and large, I will always defer to what the client's idea is because this is all about them, not about me. If there work to that mental exhaustion in a coaching session and something just pops up, I'm not like so preoccupied with a thought. I might say, client, as you were sharing, fictitious name here, Larry. Larry, you shared something here in this coaching session and an idea came up for me. Do I have your permission to share that? I get consent first. If the client does not give me consent, I'm just like, all right, continue, carry on. If they say yes, I'll share it and then ask what that means for them. I don't define it for them. I don't give them an idea on what my idea means. I let them define that.
So the key piece here is Sam is taking responsibility that it's his thought, that it's not the client's thought. Also, there could be an inopportune time for you to even say that. Like, it's not appropriate for you to say that, but you've had that thought. You could just jot it down to get it out of your head if it's stuck there. That's what I would do in the history of me. Writing it down allowed me just to refocus and not think about it.
Right.
So I think that we're covering half of the picture here too. When we say this, we jumped into what is very obvious for us with regard to this giving advice and how we don't want to do that. But I think there's another piece that's a little more subtle in here. And what that is that we are not responsible for the outcomes of what happens outside of that session. We are not responsible for their success. We are not responsible for their failures. We are not responsible for anything that they do outside of the session or even within the session. We are not responsible for them. They are in charge of themselves and their lives. So we do not take that with us. Our clients' successes and failures are not our choices. Those are their choices. So we do not hold that responsibility as a coach. And that can be so hard for coaches to do, especially being attached to outcomes with our clients. We got to let go of that. And I think this says that in there. I think this is something that we have to be aware of. And sometimes it's hard to forget because our egos get locked into it and we want our clients to have success. And we start to think that we are bad coaches because of X, Y, and Z is going on with their clients. No, the client is responsible for their choices, not you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a framework that we are holding sacred. Sam put it in our chat real quick there about that safe space. Speak about that, Sam.
Yeah, so our responsibility is to make room for the client to explore in spaces where they otherwise wouldn't have had that opportunity. It's not that our clients are stupid or they're dumb or they don't know what to do. It's just in previous spaces they've been made to feel silly or unimportant because the smartest person in the room once upon a time did not agree with their idea. So when they come into our coaching spaces, we ask questions, we allow them to explore in the space of an hour, 30 minutes, however long our coaching session is. We let them get out their ideas, their big ideas, their small ideas, their silly ideas, their right or wrong answers. And we're just curious. We're not saying, well, that's unrealistic. That doesn't make any sense. Everybody else has already done that. We'll ask, okay, tell me more about that. What else would happen if you continue to walk in the space? And notice as I'm backing up, now there's more room to occupy. That's literally what I think about when we say it's our responsibility to hold the safe space. Make room, expand your own space. Essentially get out of your client's way. That way they can take up their space with ideas that they didn't even realize they had. Okay, I'm done now.
Well, and also that mindset, that coaching mindset, which is what we're going through as we go through these competencies. It is our responsibility to stay in that mindset. Yeah, go ahead, Brogan.
I also, as I'm reading through these, want to reorder them, but I'm not going to. I'm resisting the urge because I feel like there's three of them that should be right next to each other because they are sort of, but they're spread apart, and I'm not understanding why. But that's okay. So let's just move on to the next one. Pretty straightforward, I think, but let's quickly talk about it. Hey, congratulations to those of you watching. You are participating in learning as a coach and development. Let's keep that going.
So 2.2 says engages in ongoing learning and development as a coach. That is pretty much baked into the ICF, credentialing process. Like once you get your credential, you have to take more classes to renew it every 3 years. And if you want to move up and get your PCC or MCC, you still have to keep doing that. Now, and even once you're MCC, you have to renew it. So that's just part of the process of being a coach. If you're not doing it, you're probably not maintaining your credential, and you're probably not a coach at that point. So
always be learning.
Yeah. Number 4, I think, is a little, number 3 is a little bit more interesting though, which is develops an ongoing.
Anthony deemed number 2 to be not interesting and was ready to move on.
I didn't even talk about it. Jeez.
I'm being accountable of our time.
Oh, yeah. Time flies when you're having fun.
But they kind of go together, so we can, talk about one or the other. Develops an ongoing reflective practice to enhance one's coaching. So
I feel this is one of the ones where I feel like this should be supported by a couple other ones, which is it should be supported by develops and maintains the ability to regulate one's emotions and mentally and emotionally prepares for sessions. Like, I feel like those two are part of this. But what do we mean when we say a reflective practice?
So it links to number 2, which is external learning versus internal learning. I'm learning from observing my own coaching sessions and reflecting on how it's evolved, essentially.
And that doesn't go away once we stop mentor coaching, right? We should always be going back and asking ourselves, how was that session? How was that session for me? How was that session in context of ICF and what ICF set expectation is? And how was that session for my clients as well? So we're supposed to be always sort of returning to this mindfulness of what we are doing. And this is that embodies a coaching mindset. And that is about, I think this is like baked in, don't get complacent. Like that's essentially partially what they're saying in a lot of this is like, let go of complacency. You have to be always pausing and reflecting and treating it from a learning eye, from a how can I improve? How can I do better? How can I learn and grow?
As we're going through, and we've got 8 of these, we're only doing 2 today, competencies. I can feel some anxiety that might come up for a new coach. How do I do all of these things? How do I maintain all of these things? How do I be mindful of all of these things? It's called practice, practice, practice. You've got to practice everything so that it becomes an organic experience. Getting feedback is really helpful towards that process outside of yourself. You get a mentor or you practice with another coach so that as long as you're looking over your coaching and looking for how can I best serve my client and then grow towards that.
And one step at a time. No one is saying you have to master all of these in one fell swoop. Some of these are going to take longer than others just because of the natural flow of your coaching conversations. That's also a good place to let you know if you're looking for places to remain accountable and lean on other coaches. Our alumni group is a fantastic resource. Thousands of coaches that have gone through coaching sessions and have sat in those same seats. You can ask them questions. You can ask us questions. We're here. There will always be an avenue for reflective learning.
All right. I think we can move on to number 4 then.
Hold on. 1 second. So this reflective practice is so important. So just circling back to the reflective practice to enhance one's coaching. I think I just want us to hold on to this and this thought as we move into the next ones and sort of see how they all, I guess, interweave with one another. So we can move to the next one. Remains aware and open to influence of context and culture on self and others. This is very verbose. It's a very there's a lot that's right. It can get but let's break that down because I think there's 2 pieces here. Influence of context and culture on self and others. So it's mentioned in the other video, being aware that we are people that work within systems. All of us have certain systems. There's a system of expectation and value within coaching. There's a system within CLCI for me. There's a system within my personal relationships. Then outside of here, my other places where I do things and work, there's a expectation and systems. And all of these things make up who I am, how I exist, and what the choices I make and why I make the choices I make. So this is being aware of that and being aware that my own experience is subjective when I'm a coach as well. This talks into bias for me as well from both directions. Sam, I see you nodding a lot.
Yes, I'm taking it all in. Please, pop off, Brooke. You got it.
But I mean, it is what this is we have to be aware and open to this is that client-centered experience. So my experiences might be different than my client's experiences because of their context and their culture. And so I need to be aware and open to those differences and not assume that my experiences because of my context and culture are the same as my clients. And yeah.
Recognizing we're all the products of our own environments, different environments, and the ones that matter are our clients.
Exactly. And that you being aware too, and this is where that reflective practice comes in, of when your biases might come forward as a coach, of when my assumptions might come up that I know what's best for or what the best choice is. That's my experience and context and culture coming forward. And I have to have that reflective practice afterwards and go, hey, man, I maybe asked around this because I thought my client should go that way, or I thought that was best for my client. And being able to be open and aware to those things and trying to temper it lower that down, and finding a way for us to sort of check those biases in context and culture. But it's interesting too, because the piece of intuition will come up here soon, and so that'll be fun to talk into.
The other additional piece that you're speaking about is that advice. That's why we don't give advice. We don't know where the client's been, the walk they've done, what their values are. We're learning all of their values. We're learning their systems, if we're going to stick with that word, about what works with them and what doesn't work with them. And if we start throwing our advice around, even in this space, what we think they ought to do, what a mistake is that. It's not going to benefit them. Many times people think that if they just give that advice, they're going to save the day. Well, the question is, are you greater than your advice? If you're only your self-value is the advice you give, that's something to check on, because you are definitely more important than the advice you give. So advice, not important, especially as you're getting to the client. Brooke said we're going to talk into intuition. That's where a little gray space comes out. Sam already gave a little sample of how that goes, that intuition. Okie dokie.
So let's move to the next one, which is perfect for this. And I want us to, I think we can kind of talk about the next three sort of closely together. So we'll move through these quickly. Uses awareness of self and one's tuition to benefit clients.
I thought you said tuition. I'm like, what are we paying for?
Intuition. Did I say tuition? Intuition. What does that mean? Or what does that look like?
Listening with more than just your ears, not just hearing the words, but hearing the energy, feeling the energy, being connected with your client beyond what they're saying, picking up on what's in the room before it's audibly spoken. I'm not saying try to predict the future for that sense, but understand that there is intuitively speaking, you might go in different directions when you hear, I feel great versus I feel great. Now, when words are one thing and energy is another, intuition has a place that can come out and play. All right, I'm hearing words, but what else is here?
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, but there's another piece too, to benefit clients. So where I think coaches can get tripped up is when I have this permission to point out, well, I'm not, you're saying you're happy, but I'm not getting the same energy. We have to trust if our client says, don't go there, I don't want that, I'm fine. We have to go with that. We can't keep needling at it. We have to, that's not benefiting our client, because my gut is telling me, no, you're not good. And they're telling me they're fine. I have to trust them at some point and know when I'm no longer benefiting my client by asking about that intuition.
And be aware, coach, of your systems, right? The filters is what I typically will call them. The filters that come up and where you think, as Sam used this word earlier, that you're the smartest person in the room. You're not. The client is. That client, what they say, how they say it, is what's going on. The permission, I'm noticing something that seems, I'm noticing it feels off. Do I have that right? So asking into it, and then like Brooke said, nope, it's fine. You leave it and let them do with it what they will. If it is anything, could you have misread it? Possibly, maybe not, but it's not for you to unearth until they're ready.
Brooke, you're muted.
Oh, you got muted, Brooke.
Yeah, Brooke, you're muted.
I think we could delve into that one, but I want us to move to the next one. Be aware though that this is one of the ones that we will sort of talk into later that does flex a little bit differently from ACC to PCC to MCC. In your ACC, you're going to ask permission to share your intuitions. When you get to MCC, you're no longer asking permission to share your intuitions. You are just sharing them. So just an awareness, there is a flex there, but for the sake of this, everybody taking this class is probably or moving towards their ACC. So I don't want to stress over that, but just know that the intuition piece does sort of flex into a new space as you move through. Next one, develops and maintains the ability to regulate one's emotions.
Yeah, don't just roll out of bed and go into a coaching session before you've had the chance to center yourself. This is why buffers and taking care of yourself outside of the coaching sessions are so important.
And that moves perfectly into what we had just said. This is that reflective practice, right? That is what this reflective practice is. And it moves right into the next one, which is mentally and emotionally prepares for a session, right? Those two work perfectly with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they should have been switched because
That's what I said. I want to reorder them.
preparing for the session comes prior to regulating your emotions during the session, which you can prepare all you want, but your client's going to be dropping bombs and doing things and saying things that you're not prepared for, and that can influence your emotions heavily. So knowing the difference between being empathetic and sympathetic with your client, holding a space for them to possibly cry, possibly raise their voice, get a little heated, and not letting that affect your coaching or the quality of your coaching.
And this sort of brings us back up to that being aware and open to the influence and context of culture on self and others. You have had your own experiences, and to assume that anything your client is going through isn't going to have a similarity in you and might not, like, you're going to be impervious to something they say triggering you or opening something up in you that goes, ooh, I remember that. I had an experience like that. That's a very natural thing to happen as a coach, for us to relate to something that our client is going through that may be emotional. So we have to have the ability to regulate that emotion that comes up for us when our client, even if we've had a similar experience. As a coach, we can't go, I went through that too. Oh my God, I totally, you know what I mean? No, we can't do that. We have to keep that in and be able to regulate our emotion and hold that space, like Sam said, for our clients. So all of this also moves perfectly into our last one, and then we can go through and discuss it all one more time, which is seeks help from outside sources when necessary.
And that's both coach and client.
So if you find yourself unable to handle anything that's going on in that session, or wanting help and assistance with anything that's going on in a session or with your client, seek help from outside sources when necessary. Do it. And this is referring out. This is going to talk to a coach or somebody else with some expertise yourself, having a support system, doing maybe some cultural research. All of these things, you are seeking help, maintaining that education, being open to learning, open to growing. It all braids beautifully together in this.
Well, and open to not having the answers.
You are strong for seeking help. You're not weak for seeking help.
Yes. And this is what embodying a coach mindset is. It's all of these things interweaved. And like you said, Lisa, it's not something you're going to get overnight. It's something that comes with practice. And it's not something that is probably going to be present at every session, 100 out of 100 for people who have their MCC. No, all of us fluctuate and have good sessions, areas we want to improve. But that's where that reflective practice comes in. And they've built that into that. They built that into that understanding ICF has that we are human, by telling us to keep learning, by telling us to have a reflective practice. They are aware that we are humans and that we have to keep doing those things in order to be able to maintain these core competencies.
And stay fresh, right? Mm-hmm. To keep that ability to always be in that seat. I'm talking very slowly, apparently, in that seat where you recognize that no matter how much experience you have, you don't have enough.
When she said stay fresh, she meant like dress nicely, be sharp, you know.
Take a shower.
Definitely part of the competencies.
I'm acting crazy. Let me stop.
I think that about wraps up our time. Is there anything we forgot? If you are watching either from our 102 classes or from YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn or anywhere you're seeing this, if there's something that you feel like needs to be added in, you want to add to the conversation, or you have a question, please let us know. 102, you can let us know in your homework. Everybody else, you can leave it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. And make sure, everybody out there, that you check out Certified Life Coach Institute and check out our live next week, where we will be covering co-creating the relationship, core competencies 3, 4, and 5 next. So, I'm going to leave a cliffhanger of what those might be.
Or you could look it up yourself. You'll probably find out as well.
And if you have any questions and you're watching, bring them to the next week so that we can answer those questions for you.
Thank you so much. Please join in this conversation. Ask your questions. Take care. Take our classes. We have amazing 3-day intensives that take you along a journey that gets you there.
All right.
Bye.
See you guys
See
later.
you guys.